Well, hello, everyone. My name is Shayna Lang. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for Pathways to Inclusive Higher Education. I'm so grateful that you're tuning in to hear more about inclusive higher education options for your students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We're just going to go over a brief overview of what inclusive higher education is in the state of Colorado and hopefully connect you with some tangible next steps. So on the screen, you'll see contact information for myself and our Executive Director, Tracy Murphy. We just really want to be available to you as needed. So feel free to take down my email and my phone number. Give me a call, send me an email anytime that you have questions about some next steps. We would love to offer support. So who are we? IN is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2014. We were founded by a group of parents and educators and advocates that said we need higher education options for students with intellectual disabilities. And so we really work to create inclusive college programs across the state of Colorado for students with ID to be able to receive academic growth, social development, and career advancement. We really want them pursuing those same goals that any other student going to college would. And on the right side, you'll see some key components of what IN does. Education, meaning we reach out to educators and help to resource them so that they can prepare students with ID for college. We do outreach in our community so that families and community organizations know about these options and equally prepare their students for this. And then we also do expansion, working with other institutions of higher education to develop more and more programs so that more doors are open to our students with ID. And then also tracking our student success. So IN runs a consortium where all program directors come together. We talk about how students are doing, how are we reaching high standards for them, and making sure that we're serving them well. So that's kind of who IN is. And a lot of what we do is things just like this, info sessions to give you more information about this possibility for your students. So let's talk about it. So I love to start with just a landscape or the history of disability services. You'll see on the screen 1880s, 1973, and 1990s. Those were big laws, federal laws that were put into place to give access to individuals with disabilities to accommodations and additional supports. But those were only for the students that already met college entry criteria. So they were already enrolled in many situations and then needed additional services such as accommodations. So those laws are so pivotal and powerful, and our students benefit from them today, but they did eliminate access to a certain population of students, in particular, those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So in 2008, at the national level, a law went out saying, we want to put funding to help institutions of higher ed support this population. And then you'll see kind of how that's trickled across our state. So in 2016, we launched our own pilot programs for inclusive higher education. 3 of those programs continue on. In 2020, we saw our first graduates. Currently, we're seeing 70 plus students that are enrolled in our programs. And we're really looking forward to expansion, where we had more legislation put in place where Colorado is saying we believe in these programs and we want to see more and more of them expand to meet students with intellectual disabilities. So this is going to be kind of another way to visualize this. I want to show you just the progression of services or the layers of services that students can access in higher education. So the first baseline layer is disability services. That's just what we call it. That is really the outcome of those first laws that require access to students that are enrolled in college to reasonable accommodations. So these are for students, this kind of checklist for you is for students that do meet traditional entry criteria. They have the right diploma, they have the GPA, all of those pieces. They're for students that are degree seeking, pursuing an associate's degree or higher. And they're for students that do meet all of the essential outcomes of the classes that they're going to be taking. So likely this is students that maybe have a 504 plan in high school and were largely included in a lot of their classes, meeting those same expectations, but just needed extended time, things like that. This is for students that only require accommodations because at the base level of higher education, modifications are not an option. So when you're just enrolled in this traditional route, you can only access accommodations. And so those are things like extended time, quiet testing environment, different assistive technology scribes, things like that. So this is a wonderful resource, but oftentimes for students with intellectual disabilities, that doesn't serve them best and doesn't actually give them access to the content. So then there's this kind of next level. I call these comprehensive services or sometimes supplemental services. These are programs that are not required They're kind of unique and they'll pop up across different institutions of higher ed, but a lot of these comprehensive services serve students that are also traditionally admitted, meet that college entry criteria, are able to reach the academic outcomes of their classes with accommodations, but might need some additional support on the social side of things or the executive side of things. So there are things like this at CSU. There is programs like this at MSU where you can go and get additional support in your social engagement and your organizational structure. But that in and of itself doesn't help our students with a lower cognition be able to actually get into college and still benefit from the whole experience. And so that's really where our inclusive services come into play. So inclusive services or inclusive higher ed, this is for students with intellectual or developmental disabilities. They don't have to meet traditional college entry criteria. They get to skirt around that system. They want to receive a certificate credential rather than a degree because they're going to be able to access both accommodations and modifications. So they're taking college courses all in line with their career goal, but they're able to utilize modifications to help that information meet their cognitive level. And because of that, they're going to receive a certificate rather than your traditional robust bachelor's degree because it's more at their level and it's a modified outcome. They're going to get more intensive staff support in all arenas of need. So academics and social and independent living and vocational development. And really, they're going to be focused in on a job goal. This is all in preparation of developing skills for a job. So just another avenue, just to look at this a bit differently, inclusive higher education programs are only offered at select institutions. They are not required at all institutions like disability services are. They have an alternative acceptance criteria, so students don't have to submit test scores, things like that. They offer a certificate credential. They primarily serve our students with intellectual disabilities. They have access to accommodations and modifications. And they have more intensive peer support. And they're fully inclusive, which I think is really important. And we'll talk about how they're inclusive. I just want to point out Vince. He was a graduate from ACC, and he said that going to college is actually a really fun thing. It's like freedom. I've learned how to be independent. And so there's so many pieces that college students learn about themselves, about the world. And so we want our students with intellectual disabilities to have that same opportunity. So within these inclusive higher ed programs, there's what we call those 4 domains of support, where they're going to support students academically, socially, in their career development, and in independence. And I'm going to go through how these programs do that in just a minute. So first, I want to tell you which of these programs actually exist in Colorado. So we have 4 currently up and running inclusive higher education programs. First at Arapahoe Community College, which is in Littleton, Colorado. That is our community college example. So they don't have on-campus living. So they're a commuter campus, and they're typically a 3-year program for students to complete their certificate. We've got the Office of Inclusive Services at UCCS in Colorado Springs. They have on-campus apartments for students to live on if they choose, and theirs is a traditionally 4-year program. UNC Goal at UNC in Greeley, theirs is also a 4-year traditional program, and they have on-campus dorms as options for living students to live on campus. And then Regis just started this past fall. They are in Denver, and their program is called Global Inclusive Program, and they also have on-campus dorms as options. So all of these programs fall under the IN consortium. So we work with their directors closely. They're all working towards the same level of inclusion and support that I'm going to be talking about. And I do want to note that they all have comprehensive transition and post-secondary program, or CTP status. This is a bit outdated of a slide, and I apologize, but Regis has recently received that as well. And so that means that students enrolled in these programs can access financial aid. They can fill out a FAFSA form and receive federal grants and federal work study. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that impacts financially in just a moment, but they have that CTP status, which essentially means that they've met a long list of criteria to show that they're inclusive and that they're helping students reach their outcomes. And then they're also all in line with a statewide comprehensive higher education certificate. So the certificate these students are receiving, that they're getting from each institution accredited by that institution, are similar across these programs so that there's transferability if students want to transfer, but also so that there's more weight to the certificate. It kind of adds weightiness to the purpose and the role of that certificate. So let's talk about the programming. How do those schools, those programs serve our students with intellectual disabilities? So first, it's in the academic realm. And I love mentioning, because I think it's so important for our perspectives, that these programs do not recreate a special education classroom on a college campus. Instead, these students are fully included, pushed in to the college environment, and then resources just come alongside them to offer support as needed. So students are going to be taking classes, traditional college classes, for credit with their peers. They're going to receive grades. They're going to receive have high standards set for them. So if they need additional support, peer mentors might come alongside them into a class to help them naturally engage in class discussion, or maybe understand a bit more of what's happening in that class, but they're going to be fully included in that environment. So students get to choose classes of their choosing based on their area of study and what they're passionate about and what they're intrigued by. They're all going to be pursuing that certificate that allows them modifications. So that means that if the entire class is working on a 5-page paper, maybe the student in inclusive higher education can only do 1 page, or maybe we're working on a really robust paragraph, or maybe we're even doing a graphic organizer to show our learning, but they're still engaging in that learning process and interacting fully in that class. So traditionally, we see that students are taking 3 courses each semester. A lot of times it's those 2 traditional classes, and then they do get 1 direct instruction class from their program staff. And that's going to be more skills like job development and independent living skills that are going to be more specialized to them. That's the only not directly inclusive component of these programs, but still very valuable. And then all of this is going to be in line with what their job goal is. They want to take classes in line with that job goal. So I always show a picture of a certificate because I think it shows the way that students can piecemeal together a certificate that really meets their vocational goals. So this is an example from our ACC program, where each semester you'll see 2 courses that the students are taking. One is prescribed, kind of like a general education, things like intro to PC applications, basic writing, things like that. And then each semester they also get to choose their own study of interest or class of interest. And they'll take both of those with support along the way. And what I love is that students don't have to stick with just one list of classes from one degree path. They can take courses from across multiple degree paths. So we've had a student interested in photojournalism or entrepreneurship. And so they took not just photo classes or photography classes, but they also took business classes to help them navigate how to promote themselves and promote their brand and navigate relationships with vendors, things like that. So they were able to take multiple things to meet their particular needs. And we really value that in this certificate. So what are some of the supports that come along with these programs in the academic realm? So there's always going to be an academic coordinator in the program staff office, and they're the ones that are providing the modifications to the students. So they work closely with faculty to understand their expectations and syllabi, and then the program staff, that academic coordinator, will modify based on the student's level of cognition. They're going to help students with tracking assignments. They're going to help them determine what accommodations and modifications are necessary for each assignment, help them with course advising and kind of coaching them through the right classes that are going to be beneficial for their future. And there's a huge emphasis on peer mentors. Peer mentors are so valuable across all of the domains that I'll talk about, but they're really great when it comes to academics because they are natural participants in the classroom, but they can help students understand what's going on. So a lot of times, we see students that have a peer mentor meet with them before class to review notes, and then maybe go to class with them to help them engage. And then maybe after class, meet to just review and make sure that they understood. And maybe they'll have scheduled times throughout the week to come back and do homework together. So they're a really wonderful asset to our students in that academic realm. Most of our inclusive higher education programs also offer study hall or office hours where they would come in and get additional support from their program staff. But then there's a big push that our students would be using all services across campuses. So they're not just going to come to program staff for support. They're going to go to the tutoring center that any other student would go to. They're going to go to the writing center. They're going to go to the library, so that the entire campus is taking ownership of supporting our students naturally, and that they know that they can do that, that they have a place in that community. So what are some of our students studying? This is a small list out of our 70 plus students that are enrolled, but we have students in graphic design, communication, early childhood, criminal justice, dance, government, healthcare, human services, sports management, and so much more. And what I love about this list is that it shows their interests and their passions. It's not just pigeonholing them into one thing. They get to choose what they're excited about and what they want to learn more about. So in the social arena, students are fully included in this sector as well, attending events, joining clubs, even starting clubs, taking on leadership roles in student government. Our students have really taken ownership of having a presence on their campus. So there's a big support when it comes to peer mentors here. So a lot of students in these programs might see an email every week of different options or different events they can go to, and they can ask a peer mentor to join them to support them, or they can go independently, or they can go with their peers. It's a lot of normative engagement and natural supports that we encourage them to have. The career piece is also really pivotal and a really unique component of inclusive higher ed. So every student in these programs are going to have a progression of job development and job experiences. They're going to start with their first year, mainly in career exploration, kind of getting acclimated to the college environment, and then just exploring what are they interested in, what are their skills, their experiences, all those components, and then working on those skill development. So building up the skills to be equipped to have a job experience. And then as we move into year two, they're going to be taking on job shadows, working on campus, doing practicums where they're getting hands-on experience. And then years 3 and 4 is really where we're honing in on the student's area of interest. We want the students to be in internships or paid employment in an area that they're passionate about, geared towards their area of study. So that's a really big piece. And all along the way, these program staff are going to be connecting these students with DVR, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, to help support them in that job development as well. During the time of inclusive higher education, the students are receiving a lot of that DVR support from the program staff. And so you'll see on the right side, post-grad, we really want to move them into connection with those DVR supports out in the community so that they can continue receiving guidance on competitive integrated employment. And then independence, which whenever I ask students, what have you learned since going to college? This is on the top of the list. I've actually learned to be independent because there was space created for them to trial and error and learn through mistakes and be a part of a campus community. And that's been really pivotal for these students. So every student in these programs are going to have person-centered planning and guidance with self-advocacy from the program staff. It's going to be very intensive and intentional for them. They're all going to have some level of guidance in life skills or instruction in life skills. So talking about public transportation or planning outings or managing relationships or managing emotions, all of those pieces are a part of that specialized course that each student takes each semester. And there's kind of a progression of how they develop those skills. And then there's going to be residential support. So UNC, UCCS, and Regis all have on-campus living options where peer mentors would go stay or go visit students from the inclusive higher education program to check in on them consistently. Make sure they're following expectations, make sure they're cleaning their apartment, and just guiding them through that learning process. Most of the time, the first 2 years, students are expected to live with other students from their inclusive higher education program in terms of dorm mates, but they're in a normative living environment. So it's not just students from the program that are going to be in that hall or that apartment complex. But in terms of who they live with, they start with the people from their program so that there's better support. That's a little bit easier to support them. And then as they grow, they can transition out from that and fade that support as needed and continue in their independence. So what are some of the outcomes? Those are the 4 components that we're seeing of students' growth in these programs. And I think it's important to take a look at what are the outcomes that we're seeing from our graduates. So one of our wonderful experiences from Shannon. She came from Grand Junction, went to UNC, came back to Grand Junction, and after getting her certificate and going through that experience of independence, she was offered a full-time position with benefits as a paraeducator. That was something she never thought she was able to do in the past, and now she is thriving and just running with that new experience and this new journey that she's on. And then we have Alnez, who's an administrative assistant, people who are graphic designers like Darius, several students like Caitlin and Paige that are teacher assistants, part-time or full-time, those that are working in the healthcare system like Jasmine, people that have pursued a self-advocacy and working with advocacy groups across Colorado, teaching ASL, being an interpreter, so many components here. And also you'll see at the bottom, Brianna and several others have now lived on their own outside of college, living on their own in apartment complexes with their peers. And it's been really wonderful to see the long-term impacts that these students have had since being fully included in a college experience. And overall, you'll see that graphic on the far right. We see that students that pursue inclusive higher ed are 3 times more likely to receive meaningful paid employment when they graduate or shortly after they graduate than those that don't pursue inclusive higher ed. And then there's also these other social pieces. They just become lifelong learners. They believe that they have a purpose in their community, so they engage with it more fully, and there's just more fulfillment in their futures. And so we really promote this as an option, as a robust growth option for students with intellectual disabilities. So let's talk a little bit about the details of how to enroll. So the admissions criteria or admission criteria for these programs is that a student would have a documented intellectual disability. And I say that with a caveat that students may not have the explicit diagnosis of intellectual or developmental disability on diagnostic materials or on their IEP. And that's okay. That doesn't count them out by any means. But what programs are going to be looking for is that students in their IEP or their documentation would show a high need of additional support and requirement of modifications to be able to access college. Because the deal is, if students can enroll in college and be successful academically with just accommodations, we want them to go that route and pursue that degree. This is really for that population of students that wouldn't be able to do so. And so that's really where that documentation and that diagnosis comes into play, but realize that there's some great area there. We want to see that students have the desire to go to college and to be as independent as possible, and that they have this motivation in them. It is not enough for mom and dad to want them for their students. It has to be from the student, because college, even with modifications and lots of support, the expectations are high and we challenge our students. And so there's going to be growth, there's going to be required grit and perseverance. And so we encourage students to really have that personal desire to be pursuing higher ed. And then really a proof or a need, shown need, proven need of modifications in order to access the academic environment. That's a really big piece of who they're going to accept or not. Currently, the programs that we have at the 4 programs I mentioned, all do not offer dual enrollment. So students do have to complete high school or complete their transition or 18 to 21 programming. So they cannot be dually enrolled doing that and coming to college, mainly because it's intensive and it takes a lot of energy and effort to really fulfill all the expectations of their college experience. And so it's really for the benefit of the student to not be pulled in multiple directions. That might change in the near future with upcoming programs. Dual enrollment might be an option, but as of now, that's just one thing to note. And students don't have to go to transition in order to come to inclusive higher education. They can come right after 12th grade, or they can continue on to transition and come after transition. So either one is great. We do expect students to follow the College Code of Conduct. So there's going to be some need of some basic independence or ability to navigate campus with support. So we will provide guidance with peer mentors, knowledge of campus police and security and all of those pieces, but we expect students to have some level of independence to navigate that on their own. And ultimately that they want to gain that certificate credential so that they can build up skills for employment. So what's the process? So students will apply to inclusive higher education programs directly on their website. So IN does not facilitate any of the applications or any of the enrollment for students. We solely want to connect families and students to the right institutions and just encourage them in their process, but we don't facilitate it. So traditionally, winter is when applications go live. So on each of those programs' websites, they would have an online application. And traditionally, what we see them expecting of families in their application is that students would complete a questionnaire where they're hearing from the student about their passions, their desires, the reason why they want to go to college. There's also a space for parents to provide their input so that they get a full picture of who the student is and what they're after. They also often ask for teacher recommendation letters or even personal recommendation letters to speak to the character of the student and just the responsibility level if they're going to be able to be successful on the college campus. And then disability documentation. Frequently, this is going to be the most recent IEP, one that can give a really robust picture of the supports that students were receiving. That's something that our program staff look very carefully at, and so it's important to provide that, as well as some medical documentation if needed. And then they offer an interview or on-campus day as well. So a space where students get to see, what does this program feel like? How does it feel to be on this college campus? And how can I see myself participating in this? And so that's a holistic part of their entire application process, because they really care about the students that are coming in, and they really want to make sure they're the right fit to help them be successful. So traditionally, those are going to be open in the winter, and then come spring is when the programs start to close out those applications and complete their interviews and everything for students. So there's a link here for you to see all of the current programs and where they land. Right now, I believe it is just Regis and UNC that still have available spots for students in the coming fall. So you can check out their links and their details on that webpage as well. So financially, I think this is such a huge component and a valuable question for families and educators to ask is, what does it cost? Because a lot of our students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, their families never planned for this in advance and never financially prepared for college. And now it's this option, and it can feel overwhelming and can feel daunting. So my hope is to give you just a picture of what a traditional, like a baseline cost would be. And then I'm going to speak to some of the resources that can help chip away at that cost as well. So students in inclusive higher education programs are going to pay the same cost per tuition as any other student. So that's going to differ across schools. Some might be $300 per credit hour. Some might be $500 per credit hour. So it's going to be different across each institution. But students in these programs are going to pay that same cost of credit hour per credit hour as any other student. The unique part is that they're taking far fewer credits. So their full-time credit load is often 6 to 9 credits each semester. So it's going to be far lower tuition costs than your traditional college student taking 18 credits. So that's one thing to note. But then in addition to tuition, there is a program fee that goes to the program staff to support them in all of those areas. That can range from $1,500 a semester to $5,000 a semester based on which institution you're at. So the universities are a bit higher because they're offering more on-campus living support, things like that. The community college is going to be a bit lower because they really value that equity piece. And so it's important to look at the costs and look at the websites of each of these programs to see what they're charging for their program fee. And then if students are living on campus, they're going to pay the same cost for room and board as any other student as well. So that is also a wide range from $10,000 to maybe $12,000 per year. So it's good to look into that with your program staff and look at their website. So I do want to point out costs vary by school. So that's why I'm not giving you any specific number, but we encourage you to reach out to the institutions and call their program staff to help navigate what is the cost going to look like. And then you can access these resources to support you. So as I mentioned before, those programs are CTP status, which means students can pursue financial aid. They can complete a FAFSA application and receive work study funds or federal grants. Because they're pursuing that modified certificate, they unfortunately don't have access to federal loans, but still lots of students are surprised by the grants that can be awarded to them. And I think that's a wonderful place to start. There are also several scholarships out there specifically for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities going to college. Some are local, some are family-based that have sent their students in this direction, and now want to help other families do that. Some are going to be college specific. These students have access to those college scholarships as well. Some are national or disability specific. So we have a financial handout on our website, and I'm happy to send that to you directly if you reach out to me via email, that has a link to an ongoing list of scholarships for these students pursuing inclusive higher education programs. Then we also encourage families to look into ABLE accounts. That's a great savings fund for students or individuals with disabilities that can be allocated to inclusive higher education. We've got a couple webinars about that as well. So I have some resource links at the end for you to check out previous webinars and learn a bit more about that. And then DVR. So students that are linked up with DVR, meeting with a counselor and have a vocational goal in line with this area of study they want to take at an inclusive higher ed program, DVR can help pay for a portion of their tuition or the student fees that they experience. They will not pay the program fee directly, but they'll pay to help cover the cost of classes. That's different per person, per DVR office, but it's always a worthwhile ask. And then CCBs, or community-centered boards, are equally unique to each individual, but they might have things like personal development scholarships or different pockets of money that can offer support to students pursuing inclusive higher ed. So it's worthwhile to ask and to reach out and build a relationship with them. And then we also point out the importance of student contribution. It's pretty natural and normative for college students to have to pay a portion of what they make towards their college degree and their college experience. And so we encourage students to think about that. What are they making from their work study funds or from their weekend job or their SSI, and how can they put a portion of that each month away towards their higher ed degree as well. So just as anything else, we encourage you to ask questions and dig deep into each school, since it's a unique financial component for each. But I'm always here to help connect you with some of these resources like ABLE accounts or your community-centered boards to kind of help you on that step towards cutting away at the cost of higher ed. So to leave you with, I want to just point out what are some of the resources that you can continue digging into to learn more about inclusive higher education. Our website, so inclusivehighered.org, is a really great resource for you just to dig into different pages for families, for students, or for educators. We also, every fall and spring, and sometimes in the summer, we offer a college mentorship program where high school students in their transition age or junior, senior year that are interested in college and have ID, they'll join me and other students that are enrolled in inclusive higher education to hear more about what the day-to-day life looks like. We talk about skill development and expectations and all of those pieces. So that's a wonderful program to join in on, completely free to participants. We also have modules online that do a deeper dive into inclusive higher education. There are 5 modules that you can go through at your own pace to get a better picture of what these programs look like and how they're serving students. And then every semester we offer resource webinars. So we have bi-monthly webinars as resources for families and educators. And then we also offer in-person meetings and some prospective family office hours. If you ever have questions, we want to resource you. And with our webinars, we always record them and put them up on our website. So I would encourage you to check out that website and go look at our past webinars where we'll talk about different community service agencies that can support students in higher ed, ways to save financially for higher ed, ways to prepare, all of those pieces. So we encourage you to check those out. And then if you're interested to stay in the loop, you can sign up for a monthly newsletter or jump into ways to give and just participate in the work that we're doing across Colorado. These are a list of resources. I don't mean to onslaught you with resources, but hopefully these are helpful. Just some different pieces to think about, ways to prepare your student for inclusive higher education, and just some great resources to check out. But ultimately, I want to leave you with my information again. My name is Shayna Lang, the Community Engagement Coordinator for IN. My email and cell phone are there, and then there's a link directly to our family office hours. We offer these every Tuesday from 3 to 5 p.m., where you can hop on a 30-minute call with me and ask me questions, and I can help you get started in the next steps to pursue inclusive higher education. So thank you so much for your time. I hope that this is helpful and resourceful for you. Please reach out with any questions, and we hope that this gives you encouragement that your student with intellectual and developmental disabilities can pursue higher education and can be successful in their future careers.